The email arrived at 6:12 a.m., glowing on Maddie Cruz's iPhone screen like a warning she didn't know she needed. She was still half awake, standing barefoot in her Manhattan apartment, sunlight bleeding through the blinds, when she read the subject line, "Private booking request, Hale wedding." Her breath stilled. Hale. There were thousands of last names in New York City, but only one made her chest tighten the way this one did. She opened the message, and there it was, spelled out casually as if it meant nothing at all. Bride, Tessa Monroe. Groom, Brandon Hale. Venue requested, Lumine & Co., Manhattan, Grand Hall. Her restaurant, her empire, a place she built from the ashes he left her in. Maddie sat down slowly, fingers shaking. Brandon never once stepped foot inside Lumine & Co. after their divorce. He had no idea she'd gone from a waitress in Texas to the owner of the most sought-after fine dining brand in Manhattan. To him, she was still the girl he once accused of never going anywhere. But now, he wanted to host his wedding here, in her building, under her roof. And he didn't know. For a second, she almost laughed. For another, she nearly cried. And then the kicker hit her, hard and cold. Attached was a note from the newly hired receptionist. "Hi, Maddie. The groom insisted the manager on duty be you. He said you owe him at least that much. Should we confirm?" The audacity. The man who destroyed her reputation, walked out with rumors trailing behind him, and married his PR sweetheart, now wanted her to serve him champagne on a silver tray. Her pulse steadied. A fire rose slowly in her chest. She typed one word back. Confirmed. Because if Brandon wanted a show, he had no idea who owned the stage now, and the curtain was about to rise, boldly, beautifully, disastrously, for him. The memories came back the moment Maddie stepped outside her apartment, the cold Manhattan air brushing against her face like an old bruise being touched again. It had been 3 years since she left Brandon Hale, but pain had a strange habit. It didn't disappear. It simply waited. Back then, she was still Madeline Cruz from rural Texas, the girl with a soft accent and second-hand clothes, who followed Brandon to New York because she believed in love more than logic. She worked double shifts at a diner, saved every dollar, and dreamed of building a life with him. But New York changed Brandon, polished him, sharpened him, fed his ego in ways she couldn't compete with. The first crack appeared when he told her not to speak during his networking dinner. "Your accent makes you sound uneducated, Maddie. Just smile, okay?" A simple sentence, a clean cut. Then came the second crack when he accidentally left his messages open on their shared MacBook Air. Maddie never forgot the words she saw. "I'm stuck with her for now. She's sweet, but going nowhere. Once I get my promotion, I'm out." She stared at the screen for nearly an hour, unable to convince herself it was real. But betrayal rarely comes alone. Brandon didn't dump her. No, he humiliated her. He leaked rumors to mutual friends that she was clingy, unfaithful, financially dependent. Online, an Instagram post of him with Tessa appeared just 2 weeks after they separated, captioned, "Finally with someone on my level." The final blow came when he told her to move out of their apartment by Friday. "You'll be fine, Maddie," he'd said, zipping a suitcase. "A girl like you belongs somewhere slower. Texas, maybe." She left with 2 bags, a cracked phone, and a heart torn open. But what Brandon never knew was this. Pain became fuel. Humiliation became discipline. And the girl he dismissed became the woman he would one day kneel before, not out of love, but out of fear. As Maddie walked toward Lumine & Company, footsteps steady, chin lifted, she realized something. Brandon thought he'd ended her story. He didn't know he had merely written her beginning. And now, unknowingly, he was walking straight into the chapter where the tables turned. Boldly, poetically, and irrevocably. New York had been cruel to Maddie Cruz, but it also became the city that shaped her spine out of steel. After Brandon threw her out, she spent 2 nights sleeping on a coworker's couch, her entire life stuffed into 2 duffel bags. She remembered staring at the city lights through a fogged bus window, whispering to herself, "You're not done. Not like this." So she worked. Really worked. A morning shift at a Brooklyn cafe, an evening shift as a hostess at a mid-tier restaurant. Late nights studying business fundamentals on a refurbished MacBook Pro she bought with every last dollar she had. Failure stalked her daily. Missed rent, exhaustion, customers yelling in her face. But she kept moving, fueled by the belief that if she stayed in motion, the pain couldn't catch her. It was during one of those exhausting nights at the Midtown restaurant that she met Elliot Warner. He wasn't flashy like Brandon, or loud like the men who dined there to be seen. Elliot carried himself with a quiet authority, tailored suit, sharp eyes, a Mont Blanc pen clipped neatly to his pocket. He noticed everything, especially her. When a coworker panicked over a large reservation, Maddie stepped forward, reorganizing tables, soothing guests, and salvaging a night that was moments away from collapse. Elliot watched the entire thing unfold with the stillness of a man evaluating potential. After service, he approached her. "You don't belong here," he said calmly. Maddie startled. "If you're here to insult me, there's a line." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Not an insult, an observation. You think like an owner, not an employee." She laughed, genuine, short, painful. "I have $37 in my checking account." "Money is the last thing I look at," he replied. "Vision is the first." That conversation changed everything. Within weeks, Elliot introduced her to the opportunity of a lifetime. A struggling fine dining chain called Lumine & Company, whose previous owner had mismanaged it into chaos. Elliot didn't want it for himself, but he saw potential in the woman who refused to break. "You run operations. I back the acquisition," he told her. 51% is yours, if you're brave enough." Brave enough? Maddie had survived Brandon. She was brave by necessity. And so, under cover of anonymity, she became the silent owner of Lumine & Company. Built from sweat, forged from heartbreak. Soon, the empire she created would be the stage where everything came full circle. For all of them. Maddie Cruz learned quickly that power didn't always need a spotlight. Sometimes the sharpest blade was the one hidden in plain sight. When she officially became the majority owner of Lumine & Company, she didn't walk into the restaurant wearing designer heels or announcing her title. No. She walked in wearing the same black manager's apron she'd worn for years, blending seamlessly into the staff she now employed. To the world, she was Maddie, the hard-working floor manager. Only a handful of executives, Elliot included, knew she owned the entire chain. It was her choice. She wanted to learn everything. How the staff spoke when they thought no one important was listening. How customers behaved when they believed she had no power. How the tiny cracks in the system could be repaired before they became disasters. Knowledge was leverage, and Maddie knew she'd need all of it one day. And that day arrived faster than expected. One Tuesday morning, she stood in the grand hall reviewing layout changes for an upcoming corporate gala. Sunlight spilled across the marble floors, reflecting off the intricate gold accents she had personally chosen after the renovation. Everything looked stunning, clean, elegant, powerful. Hers. Then the elevator opened. She didn't expect to see them yet, not this soon. Brandon Hale and Tessa Monroe stepped out together, arm in arm, dripping in overconfidence. Tessa's designer dress sparkled under the chandeliers, though her smile was sharper than any jewel she wore. Brandon's eyes scanned the restaurant with the entitlement of a man who believed places existed purely to serve him. They didn't notice Maddie at first, but she noticed everything. Brandon looked taller somehow, or maybe it was the arrogance lifting him off the ground. Tessa's gaze flitted from table to table, already judging, already imagining herself as the star of the night. Finally, Brandon spotted Maddie. He didn't look shocked. He looked amused. "Well," he said loudly enough for his voice to echo across the hall. "I guess some people really can't move up, no matter where you drop them." Tessa giggled, clutching his arm. "At least she's consistent." Maddie smiled, calm, steady, unreadable. They thought they were mocking a waitress. They had no idea they were speaking to the woman who signed their reservation contract and paid the salaries of every person in the room. And soon, they would learn exactly what that meant. Brandon Hale walked through Lumine and Company as if he owned the place, ironic considering the woman he once discarded actually did. Maddie followed a few steps behind, clipboard in hand, blending into her role as the obedient manager. She kept her expression neutral, but internally she mapped every arrogant gesture he made, every dismissive glance, every careless command. He paused near the champagne bar, running his fingers along the marble counter she personally designed. "This is decent," he said, "but for my wedding, I expect something elevated." Tessa nodded vigorously. "Yes, more white roses, more gold, and lighting that highlights me from every angle." She turned to Maddie with a sugary smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Do you think you can handle that, sweetheart?" Maddie's jaw tightened, but she remained composed. "We can accommodate your requests." Tessa smirked, then leaned closer. "Good, because I want our wedding to look expensive. Cameras will be everywhere. You understand the pressure." Brandon added, "Just don't mess up, Maddie. This event is the biggest thing that'll happen to this place." The irony nearly made her laugh out loud. As they continued the walkthrough, Maddie instructed staff members on minor adjustments. Suddenly, Brandon snapped his fingers at her. "You," he barked. "Come here." She approached slowly. "We want to test entree options," Brandon said, tossing his coat onto a nearby chair without looking. "Bring us samples. And hurry, we have real meetings after this." Tessa chimed in. "Oh, and bring extra napkins. Brandon gets fussy when things drip." A staff member watching nearby clenched his jaw, clearly offended by the tone. Maddie subtly signaled him to step back. She didn't need anyone defending her. Not yet. Not today. Just when she thought the humiliation couldn't get worse, Tessa pointed at Maddie's shoes. "Are those the store brand ones? Adorable, truly. It's nice that you're practical." The insult hit harder than expected, not because Maddie cared about the shoes, but because it reminded her of the old Maddie, the one Brandon trained to feel small. But that Maddie was gone. She straightened, meeting Tessa's gaze calmly. "Is there anything else you'd like me to note?" Tessa blinked, thrown off by the lack of reaction. Brandon scowled, annoyed he couldn't provoke her. As they turned away, Brandon murmured, "Imagine being stuck working here forever." Maddie almost smiled. He couldn't imagine how wrong he was. By the time Brandon and Tessa finally swept out of Lumine and Company, the staff exhaled in collective relief. But Maddie didn't have a moment to breathe. Her phone buzzed with a message from the one person who always saw through her calm facade. Elliot Warner. "My office. Now." 10 minutes later, she stood inside his midtown tower, glass walls, skyline views, and Elliot himself positioned behind his sleek MacBook Pro, sleeves rolled up, jaw tight. He didn't look at her at first. He only clicked through security footage of Brandon snapping his fingers at her, Tessa mocking her shoes, the entire humiliating walkthrough. "You let them talk to you like that," he said quietly. "It's fine," Maddie replied. Elliot finally lifted his gaze, sharp, disbelieving. "It's not fine. You're the owner. You don't have to tolerate this." She sank into the leather chair opposite him. "But that's the point. They don't know." "And how long do you plan to keep it that way?" Maddie hesitated. She had rehearsed this conversation in her mind, but now that it was happening, words tangled in her throat. "Until the wedding. Until it matters." Elliot leaned back, studying her. "You're planning something." "Not revenge," she said softly. "Just truth." He exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead. I don't like it.
It's my past, Elliot.
Let me close it my way. A long silence stretched between them as the sun lowered behind Manhattan's skyline. Then Elliot spoke, voice lower. There's something you should know. About Tessa. Maddie looked up. What about her? Elliot's expression darkened. She isn't just Brandon's fiancée. She's someone who used to be tied to my family. Her old scandals nearly cost my father's firm a partnership. She changed her last name afterward. The revelation hit hard. So Tessa wasn't just reckless, she was dangerous. And now she's reattached herself to another man she can use, Elliot added. Brandon may have no idea who he's marrying. Maddie swallowed. Should we warn him? Elliot shook his head. He wouldn't listen. Men like Brandon only learn when consequences break them. His words lingered like an omen. Outside the office windows, the city glowed, brilliant and relentless. Inside, Maddie realized something. The wedding wouldn't just expose Brandon. It might expose Tessa, too. And, unknowingly, they were building their own downfall. The morning after the meeting with Elliot, Lumine and company buzzed with unease. Word had spread among the staff. The VIP groom had treated Maddie, their calm, respected manager, like a disposable servant. No one dared confront Brandon directly, but the tension simmered beneath every whispered conversation. Maddie pretended everything was normal. She checked inventory, approved lighting adjustments, and reviewed vendor notes. But her stomach twisted each time someone mentioned the upcoming wedding. By noon, the day took an unexpected turn. A staff member hurried up to her, holding an iPad.
Maddie? You need to see this.
On the screen was a trending post from a gossip account. Is Brandon Hale's ex-wife still obsessed with him? Sources say she's lingering around his wedding venue. Then there were screenshots, old photos Tessa had dug up, clearly fed by Brandon, painting Maddie as a clingy, jealous ex who couldn't move on. A hollow ache settled in Maddie's chest. After everything she endured, they were still coming for her. Another staff member muttered, "Why would they post something like this? Maddie doesn't bother anyone." A server added, "If that were my ex, I'd ban him from the building." Maddie forced a tight smile. "It's fine. Please get back to work." But it wasn't fine. Brandon had always been good at rewriting stories, turning himself into a hero at the expense of whoever stood closest. Now, with a wedding hashtag to maintain, he needed Maddie to be the villain. She stepped into the back hallway, pressing her palm to her chest to steady her breath. The old panic crept up, the same suffocating feeling she had when Brandon shoved her out of their apartment with 2 suitcases and a broken heart. Just as the anxiety peaked, a voice cut through. "Maddie?" It was Ben, the quiet sous chef who rarely spoke unless necessary. He held out a steaming cup of coffee. "You look like you need this," he said shyly. Maddie blinked. "Thank you, Ben, really." He hesitated. "You don't deserve what they're saying. Some of us, we know who you really are." Her throat tightened. Someone believed her. Before she could respond, her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Enjoy being in the background while I shine at the wedding. Don't embarrass yourself, Maddie. Tessa." A second message followed. "Know your place." Maddie stared at the screen, anger stirring beneath her ribs. Oh, she knew her place. At the top. They just hadn't realized it yet. By the time Maddie finished her shift, the city had already slipped into its evening glow. Manhattan's skyline shone like a constellation of sharp, glittering teeth, beautiful, but ready to bite. Normally, she would take the subway home, curl up with her notes, and drown her stress in chamomile tea. Tonight, she couldn't breathe. Her chest felt tight, her hands cold. Tessa's text replayed in her mind like a poison loop. Know your place. Know your place. Know your place. She pressed a hand to her sternum, inhaling shakily. Panic wasn't new to her. Brandon had planted that seed years ago, but this was different. This wasn't fear of him. This was fear of becoming who he claimed she was. She needed air. She needed silence. She needed Elliot. She didn't mean to call him.
Her trembling thumb hit his name by accident. But when she heard his voice, steady, low, grounding, she nearly crumpled right there on the sidewalk. "Maddie, what's wrong?" She swallowed hard.
I don't know. Can I come over?
"You're already expected," he replied. Penthouse doors open. His penthouse overlooked Park Avenue, all glass and warm lighting, an impossible contrast to the chaos inside Maddie's chest. When she stepped in, Elliot didn't ask questions. He simply held out a soft blanket and a warm mug of Starbucks chamomile tea. "Sit," he said gently. She sat, and finally, the tears fell.
I thought I was past this,
she whispered.
but seeing the posts, the comments, it feels like I'm drowning all over again.
Elliot lowered himself beside her, elbows on his knees. "Brandon broke you down for years. Healing doesn't erase that overnight." "I hate that they still have power over me." "They don't," he said firmly. "You're reacting to echoes, not reality." She wiped her cheeks.
Feels real.
"That's why I'm here. To remind you of who you've become, not who he told you you were." Something in his voice softened the weight on her ribs. Elliot had a way of speaking that rebuilt her without even trying. After a long silence, he added, "You won't face the wedding alone. I'll be there." She looked at him, startled. "Why?" His eyes held hers. "Because, Maddie, you deserve to be seen, properly." Her pulse stuttered. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She felt chosen. Outside, the city roared. Inside, something new began to bloom. The day of the wedding arrived with the kind of cold Manhattan wind that cut through even the thickest confidence. By 3 p.m., Luminet and Company glowed like a jewel. Golden sconces polished, champagne chilled, white roses arranged in cascading towers that Tessa insisted on for aesthetic impact. Staff hurried across the marble floors, adjusting final details. No one said it aloud, but every employee seemed to be standing a little closer to Maddie than usual, as though silently protecting her. Maddie walked through the grand hall with her tablet, checking tasks one by one. Her hair was tied back, apron crisp, expression composed. She looked exactly like the manager Brandon assumed she was. But her eyes carried a storm. The doors swung open. Brandon and Tessa strutted in first, trailed by a freelance videographer who filmed their every dramatic step. Brandon was in a designer tux he definitely couldn't afford without credit. Tessa sparkled in a beaded white gown that screamed sponsorship. "Maddie," Tessa called sweetly. "Come here. We need assistance." Maddie approached, steady. Tessa extended her hand without looking at her. "Hold this," she ordered, dropping her Cartier clutch into Maddie's palm like Maddie was a coat rack. Brandon snickered, glancing at the videographer. "Make sure you get this. We want a behind-the-scenes look at how hard everyone works for us." The humiliation was intentional, crafted, public. But Maddie didn't flinch. Still, the staff noticed, and they bristled. Ben, the sous chef, muttered under his breath, "I swear if they talk to her like that again." "Not now," Maddie whispered. "Save your energy." As she turned to leave, Tessa called out again. "Oh, and Maddie? Be careful with the clutch. It's worth more than your monthly salary." Several employees froze. Maddie inhaled slowly. "Of course, Ms. Monroe." She walked away, gripping the clutch lightly so her frustration wouldn't crush it. The insult didn't wound her pride. It enraged her memory. This was exactly how Brandon used to chip away at her self-worth. But today wouldn't end like the past. As she rounded the corner toward the kitchen, a familiar voice murmured behind her.
You're handling this better than anyone else could.
She turned. Elliot. He had arrived early, quiet, immovable, steady as stone. You ready? He asked softly. Maddie looked back toward the hall where Brandon and Tessa posed for cameras. I'm ready, she said. Let the show start. And the first crack in the facade was already forming. The evening crowd flooded into Lumine and Company with the entitled energy of people who believed attendance alone made them important.
Laughter echoed beneath the chandeliers, heels clicked across the marble, and waiters weaved through the space carrying trays of champagne that cost more than Maddie used to earn in a week. Brandon thrived in it. He stood near the floral arch, posing, performing, pretending, while Tessa fluttered around him like a sequined butterfly. Cameras followed, guests gossiped, and every moment seemed engineered for social media. But the real show hadn't begun. Maddie kept to the outskirts, directing staff, adjusting timelines, making sure the evening ran flawlessly. If Brandon noticed how smoothly the event flowed, he'd credit himself. If anything went wrong, he'd blame her. It was the pattern of their relationship, alive even in divorce. Then it happened. During a quiet pause between courses, a group of guests gathered near the bar. One of them, the type who bragged loudly about crypto investments, asked Brandon loudly, "So, is it true? Your ex-wife works here?" Brandon smirked, throwing a glance toward Maddie, who stood a few feet away reviewing a seating chart. "Yeah," he said, projecting his voice for maximum reach. "She never had much ambition. This is about as far as she could climb." His circle burst into cruel laughter. Someone else chimed in. "Well, at least she's useful tonight. Every wedding needs staff." Another guest added, "Didn't she used to be clingy or something like that?" Brandon shrugged casually. "She was always holding me back. Upgrading was the smartest thing I ever did." A few phones discreetly recorded the exchange. Maddie felt the familiar sting, sharp, humiliating, ancient. The old Maddie, the one he'd broken, the one he'd convinced was unworthy, trembled somewhere deep inside her chest. But the woman she'd become didn't flinch. She inhaled, straightened her shoulders, looked him square in the eye, and softly said to a nearby staff member, "Play the next cue. We stay on schedule." Her voice didn't shake, her hands didn't tremble, but the room did, because Elliot, who had walked in just in time to hear everything, stepped beside her, gaze locked on Brandon, with a warning that could cut glass. The tide had shifted. Brandon just hadn't realized his downfall had already begun. Elliot Warner didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stepped forward with the quiet force of someone who owned entire boardrooms simply by entering them. Conversations dimmed, cameras lowered. Even the air seemed to tighten around him. Brandon, still basking in the glow of mocking Maddie, froze when Elliot's shadow fell across him. "Is there a problem here?" Elliot asked, tone calm but laced with steel. Brandon blinked rapidly. "Elliot, wow, I didn't know you were coming." The sudden shift in his demeanor was almost laughable. Confidence evaporated, replaced by frantic politeness. Around them, guests whispered, "Is that Elliot Warner, the investor? What's he doing with the staff manager?" Elliot ignored Brandon completely and turned to Maddie with a softness no one had ever seen directed at a mere manager. "Are you okay?" he asked. The question, so simple, so human, sent a ripple through the crowd. Because the way he looked at her, that wasn't how anyone looked at staff. That was how someone looked at an equal, someone important. Maddie nodded. "I'm fine. Please don't escalate anything." But Elliot's gaze returned to Brandon, colder now. "I heard what you said." Brandon's smile faltered. "Just joking around." "Humiliation isn't a joke," Elliot replied calmly. "Unless you're trying to expose your own insecurity." A few guests gasped. Others tried to film discreetly. Brandon stuttered, "Look, man, we're here to celebrate. No need to get dramatic." But Elliot stepped closer,
lowering his voice enough that only their small circle could hear, though his tone carried weight like a hammer. Maddie carries this entire event. You should be thanking her instead of degrading her. Tessa appeared at Brandon's side, linking their arms tightly. Elliot, sweetie, let's not make this uncomfortable. Elliot looked at her for the first time, and recognition flickered in his eyes. A quiet, dangerous recognition. Tessa Monroe, he murmured. Or should I say, Tessa Morgan? The color drained from her face instantly. Maddie's brows furrowed.
Morgan? Elliot didn't elaborate, but his expression spoke volumes. Tessa stepped back, gripping Brandon's arm as if to silence him. The atmosphere shifted. Guests sensed a story, one bigger than wedding drama. Maddie watched Brandon's smile crack, watched Tessa's confidence crumble, watched the balance of power tilt. For the first time that evening, she wasn't the one standing in the shadows. The spotlight, unwanted yet overdue, had begun moving in her direction. And Brandon was finally starting to sense that tonight wasn't going to be the victory lap he'd planned. The moment Elliot spoke the name Tessa Morgan, the room shifted, quietly at first, then like a tremor rolling through marble floors. Tessa stiffened beside Brandon, her manicured nails digging into his sleeve as though she could physically hold her secrets in place. Maddie watched with growing confusion. Morgan? That name didn't belong to the social climbing PR princess she knew. It belonged to someone who came from scandal, someone who'd been whispered about in business circles for months. Brandon forced a laugh. What is this, Elliot? Some kind of joke? But Elliot didn't joke. He tilted his head slightly, studying Tessa with the detached disappointment of someone who had seen this performance before. No joke, he said. Just surprised you'd show your face again after what happened in Chicago. Chicago. The word dropped like a weight. Tessa's voice trembled. Elliot, stop. Not here. Oh? Elliot asked softly. You didn't mind the attention when you forged investor contracts under my uncle's firm, did you? Gasps shot through the crowd. A few phones lifted, not high enough to be obvious, but definitely recording. Brandon whipped toward Tessa. You did what? Tessa shook her head rapidly. It wasn't like that. It wasn't fraud. It was just miscommunication. Miscommunication doesn't usually involve felony charges, Elliot replied. Her breath hitched. The charges were dropped. Dropped, Elliot repeated, because you changed your last name and ran before the hearing. Now the crowd fully murmured. Brandon looked like the ground had ripped open beneath him. You told me the name change was rebranding for your PR career. Tessa reached for him, panicked. Brandon, listen, I can explain. But he jerked away. Meanwhile, Maddie felt the world tilting, not in chaos, but in clarity. This wasn't just karma. This was the universe tying loose threads she never knew were connected. Elliot's eyes softened when they met Maddie's. I didn't mention this earlier because it wasn't your bird, but you needed to know who they really are. Brandon spun toward Maddie suddenly, as if searching for someone to blame. You brought him here to embarrass us. Maddie held her ground. I invited no one. Consequences invite themselves. The room went silent, angry, exposed, cornered. Tessa grabbed her dress, whispering harshly, We can fix this. Just smile. Pretend nothing happened. But Brandon wasn't listening, because for the first time he realized the wedding wasn't unraveling from the outside. It was collapsing from within. And Maddie hadn't even spoken yet. The ballroom felt electrically charged, like the seconds before a storm finally breaks. Guests hovered in clusters, pretending to sip champagne while shamelessly watching Brandon and Tessa unravel in real time. Maddie could feel every eye flicking between her, Elliot, and the disgraced, nearly newlyweds. But the universe wasn't done yet. As staff hurried to reset the dessert display, a new intern, nervous, eager, and far too inexperienced for a night like this, approached Maddie holding a thick binder.
Miss Cruz, he said loudly, do you want the owner copy of the event contract now or after the presentation? Silence. Freezing, echoing silence. Brandon looked up sharply. Tessa nearly dropped her champagne flute. The crowd collectively inhaled. Maddie blinked. The what copy? The intern, oblivious to the nuclear bomb he had just detonated, continued cheerfully. The owner copy. You know, the one with your signature on every page. He held up the binder, and there, stamped in gold, Luminae & Co. Owner Edition. Madison Cruz, majority shareholder. Brandon's jaw unhinged.
What the hell is this? Tessa stared at Maddie as if seeing her for the first time, not as a threat, not as a rival, but as a disaster she had failed to anticipate. You own this place? The staff, who had suspected but never confirmed, glanced at each other in awe. Maddie exhaled slowly. She hadn't planned for it to come out this way, not through an intern with terrible timing, but fate clearly enjoyed delivering poetic punchlines. She took the binder gently. Thank you. I'll handle it from here. The intern nodded, scurried off, and the explosion officially began. Brandon stormed toward her. You lied to me. She met his rage with calm. We're divorced, Brandon. I don't owe you my resume. You let me talk to you like some underpaid worker. You chose to talk to me that way, Maddie corrected softly. Someone in the crowd whispered, Oh, that's good. Tessa stepped forward, voice trembling. So, you're rich? Maddie smiled faintly. I'm capable. Wealth was a byproduct. Brandon's face reddened, humiliation blooming like wildfire. You were beneath me. You were nothing. Elliot stepped in, voice smooth as silk. Funny. I see nothing beneath you right now, except the shattered remains of your ego. Guests snickered. The scales had tipped, the narrative had shifted, and the night had only just begun turning against them. If the night had been cracking before, part 14 was the moment it split open. The ballroom lights flickered, just once, but enough to ripple unease across the room. The audio technician signaled to Maddie, panic in his eyes. The custom sound system Tessa insisted on renting, some overpriced luxury brand she claimed only celebrities use, was glitching. Of course, Maddie muttered under her breath. Before she could step in, Tessa snapped her fingers sharply. Maddie, fix the lights, fix the audio, fix literally everything. This is your job. The entitlement dripped like acid. But the universe had a sense of humor. Because when Maddie approached the booth, the technician whispered, The system's overloaded. Too many demands, too many last-minute changes. Someone forced it to run settings that weren't compatible. He didn't say who. He didn't need to. Maddie looked over her shoulder, straight at Tessa, adjusting her gown dramatically for the cameras. Brandon joined in, pointing a finger at Maddie like she was a malfunctioning appliance. If you screw this up, you're paying for it. I don't care if you save tips for 5 years. I want perfection. The staff stiffened. Guests leaned in. Phones subtly lifted. Maddie inhaled, voice calm. Let me try something. She knelt beside the panel, fingers flying across controls she knew better than the manufacturer. Sweat pricked her temple. The pressure was enormous, this room full of people rooting for her to fail or to rise, nothing in between. For a brief second, the lights surged bright, illuminating everything like a spotlight. A collective gasp echoed, because in that flash of brilliance, Tessa's makeup streaked under stress, Brandon's fake tan smeared across his collar, and Elliot, leaning against a marble pillar, watched Maddie with something dangerously close to admiration. Then the lights stabilized. The audio returned clearer than before. Guests erupted into applause. Tessa's face twisted. Lucky accident, she huffed. But several guests whispered, She saved the wedding, and others murmured, That's real skill, not whatever Tessa does.
Brandon forced a shaky smile.
Fine. Good. She did her job. Maddie stood, wiping her hands.
I did my job. Now you should focus on doing yours, staying calm. His eye twitched. He hated being spoken to like an equal, yet the entire room had witnessed her competence dwarf his arrogance. A crack formed in his confidence, a deeper one in Tessa's facade. And in that moment, the wedding didn't just wobble. It officially began to crumble. The ballroom had barely recovered from the lighting scare when another shift swept across the room, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Elliot moved toward the front, where several influential guests had gathered. Brandon noticed immediately, straightened his jacket, and hurried over like a man desperate to attach himself to someone powerful. "Elliot, glad you're enjoying the wedding," Brandon said, voice too bright, too eager. Elliot didn't bother responding.
Instead, he was listening to Mr. Davenport, a well-known real estate mogul and one of the major silent investors in Lumine & Co. Davenport clapped Elliot's shoulder and said loudly enough for half the room to hear, "You two picked a brilliant owner. Maddie Cruz is one of the sharpest minds I've ever backed."
Brandon froze. Davenport continued, oblivious to the emotional demolition he was causing.
"I've never seen anyone scale a business so cleanly. Elliot, your partnership with Maddie is one of the smartest moves your firm has made."
Gasps rippled across nearby tables. Maddie stood a few feet away, realizing this was it. The moment Brandon could no longer pretend he misheard, misunderstood, or misinterpreted anything. Brandon forced a laugh, voice cracking. Wait, Maddie? That Maddie? The manager? Elliot pivoted slowly, expression unreadable.
"She's been the majority owner for almost 2 years. Brandon's face drained of color. Tessa's glass clinked against her teeth as she stared at Maddie in horror.
You're wealthy? Like, real wealthy?"
Davenport chuckled. "Real enough to buy this entire building if she ever wanted to."
The crowd murmured loudly now, feeding on the shock like vultures circling fresh carnage. Brandon stumbled toward Maddie. "Why didn't you tell me?" She lifted her chin. "Why would I? You let me embarrass myself." "You embarrassed yourself," she corrected softly. "All I did was show up and work." Laughter, sharp, delighted, cruel, rippled from one of the tables. Brandon's humiliation deepened into something uglier. His voice rose. "You think you're better than me? Is that it?" Elliot stepped between them, posture relaxed, but voice dangerous. "She doesn't have to think it, Brandon.
Everyone can see it." Brandon's breathing turned frantic, erratic.
He looked around the room and found no allies, no admiration, only pity, judgment, and morbid fascination. Tessa backed away from him, whispering, "This wasn't the plan. You lied to me. You said she was nobody." But the truth rang louder than any vow they had planned to exchange. Tonight, only one thing was clear. He had married the wrong woman, and underestimated the right one. If the night had been unraveling before, Part 16 was the moment the entire wedding detonated. The microphone on stage crackled to life as the event coordinator announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue with the dinner service, our venue's owner has been requested to say a few words." Guests turned curiously. Brandon's head whipped around. Tessa stiffened, clutching her clutch like a life raft.
And then Elliot stepped aside, clearing a path. Maddie walked forward. Slowly, calmly, with the kind of poise people aren't born with, but forged through humiliation, heartbreak, and clawing her way back into the light. Whispers spread like wildfire. "That's her? She owns Lumine & Company? She looks powerful." Maddie reached the center of the stage. For a moment, she simply held the microphone, breathing through the weight of 100 staring eyes. Public speaking once terrified her, but tonight, fear had no room left to occupy. "Good evening," she began softly. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate Brandon and Tessa.
Her voice was calm, almost gentle. But the calm before a hurricane is also gentle. "I've had the privilege of overseeing the operations of Lumine and Company," she continued. "And for the past 2 years, I've been honored to serve as its majority owner." Gasps erupted.
Several guests nearly dropped their glasses. On the left side of the room, Brandon mouthed something that looked a lot like, "No, no, no." Tessa swayed slightly, gripping a nearby chair. "But more importantly," Maddie added, her gaze steady, "I've learned that success isn't measured by who claps for you, but by who tries to tear you down and fails." A murmur of admiration swept across the tables. She didn't mention Brandon directly. She didn't have to. Every person in the room knew exactly what she meant. Behind her, Elliot watched proudly, shoulders relaxed, expression soft in a way no one had ever seen from the famously stoic CEO. Maddie ended with a simple bow of her head. "Thank you for supporting our establishment tonight. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening." Polite applause began, then genuine applause, then cheering. Brandon stood there, trapped under a spotlight he'd never wanted. His face flushed red, then pale, then red again. Tessa whispered urgently, "Do something." But he couldn't, because in one elegant, devastating moment, Maddie had reclaimed the narrative, the power, and the room. And nothing, not a wedding, not a lie, not a man, could take that from her again. Brandon Hale moved toward the stage like a man drowning, desperate, frantic, grasping for anything that might pull him back to the surface. But the room had changed. People no longer looked at him with admiration or curiosity. They watched him the way one watches a car crash, horrified, yet unable to look away. "Maddie," he hissed, voice cracking as he climbed the steps. "We need to talk. Now." She stepped down gracefully, refusing to let him corner her in front of the crowd. But Brandon followed, grabbing her wrist in a panic. Elliot intercepted instantly. "Let go," he commanded, voice quiet but deadly. Brandon dropped her wrist as if burned. I'm not hurting her. I need a second to explain." The hypocrisy was almost laughable. "Explain what?" Maddie asked calmly. "How you mocked me? Lied about me? Told people I held you back?" Brandon swallowed hard. "I only said those things because I thought you were still you." "That's the problem," Maddie replied softly. "You never cared who I became, only who I was beneath you." Gasps whispered through the crowd. He flinched. "Maddie, please," he begged, reaching for her again. "We were good once. Maybe we can be—" "No," she said gently, stepping back. "We were never good. I just didn't know my worth yet." The words hit him harder than any slap. Behind him, Tessa watched with growing fury. Her glittering facade cracked entirely.
"So what now?"
Tessa snapped.
"You embarrass us, ruin the wedding, and expect applause?"
Maddie turned, locking eyes with her.
"I didn't ruin anything. Your secrets did. Your choices did."
Tessa trembled.
"You think you're better than me because you're rich now?" "No,"
Maddie said.
"I'm better because I stopped letting people like you define me."
Elliot stepped beside her, solid, steady. Brandon looked between them, realization dawning with devastating clarity.
"You're with him?"
He choked out.
"Was that your plan? Replace me with a billionaire?"
Maddie almost laughed.
"I never replaced you. You were never a standard to begin with."
A wave of shocked laughter swept across the ballroom. Brandon's face crumpled, anger, jealousy, humiliation twisting into one final desperate plea.
"Maddie, please, don't leave me like this."
She looked at him with the gentleness of someone who had finally healed. "I'm not leaving you. I left you years ago. You just didn't notice." The room erupted.
whispers, awe, satisfaction. And Brandon realized something too late. He hadn't just lost the girl he underestimated. He'd lost the audience he lived for. Brandon Hale had survived scandals before, mostly ones he created himself, but nothing prepared him for the avalanche about to hit. Because the moment he reached for another excuse, another lie, another desperate attempt to salvage dignity, the universe decided it was done granting him chances. It started with a phone alert, a sharp ding from somewhere in the crowd. Then another, and another. People glanced at their screens, eyes widening. A video had begun circulating, fast.
Someone had uploaded the clip of Brandon mocking Maddie earlier. She never had much ambition. This is about as far as she could climb. The caption read, "Groom insults staff at his own wedding. Turns out she owns the venue." Within minutes, the ballroom was filled with the buzz of notifications. Guests whispered, shifting uncomfortably as they realized they were witnessing a public meltdown in real time. Brandon grabbed his phone, his face drained of all color. "Oh my God," he whispered. "This already has 20,000 views. Who recorded this?" A guest muttered, "If you didn't want it online, maybe you shouldn't have said it." Tessa heard her own phone vibrating nonstop. She checked the screen and went pale. Another video had surfaced. This one wasn't about Brandon. It was about her. A resurfaced Chicago news clip flashed across devices. PR consultant Tessa Morgan questioned in connection with investment forgery scandal. Guests stared at her with open disgust. Is that her? She lied about her name? She scammed investors? Tessa's breath hitched. Turn it off. Turn it off! But the internet was a beast, and it had already sunk its teeth in. Elliot, arms crossed, watched them unravel. "Consequences move faster than lies," he murmured. Brandon turned to Maddie again, this time not angry, not arrogant, but terrified. "You have to fix this, please. Tell them it's fake." Maddie shook her head. "I won't lie for you. Not anymore." "But my job, my reputation, everything will crash." "It's crashing because you built it on people you stepped on," she said quietly. Then, with brutal timing, the event coordinator hurried up. We have a problem," she whispered. "Two sponsors just pulled out. They don't want their brands associated with this." Brandon staggered backward. Tessa sank into a chair, trembling. The wedding wasn't just ruined. It was radioactive. As guests began whispering, filming, and drifting away, one truth settled across the room like ash. Their downfall wasn't caused by Maddie's power, but by their own character. And now, their perfect fairy tale had finally collapsed. The morning after the ruined wedding felt strangely peaceful. While the internet devoured every angle of Brandon and Tessa's downfall, Manhattan moved on with its usual indifference. Traffic humming, horns echoing, life going on. But for Maddie Cruz, it was the first morning in years where her chest felt light. She sat near the window of a cozy Starbucks on Park Avenue, a warm cup of chamomile tea between her hands. No cameras, no insults. No ghosts of who she used to be. Just quiet. For once, she wasn't studying business notes or reviewing vendor logs. Instead, she opened her well-worn copy of Atomic Habits, a book she had clung to during her darkest rebuilding years. The words didn't feel like survival instructions anymore. They felt like confirmation. She had built a new life, and last night proved she was finally living it. As she read, someone approached her table, not with chaos or urgency, but with calm familiarity. Elliot. He set down his own drink, a black coffee, and pulled out the chair across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply shared the stillness. "You look lighter," he said gently. "I feel lighter," Maddie smiled. "Yesterday was a lot, but I think I needed it." "You needed closure," he corrected. "And you got it." She nodded. The truth settled warmly in her chest. "Brandon and Tessa?" she asked.
Elliot raised an eyebrow. Brandon's sponsors dropped him. Tessa's PR clients ran for the hills. They're trending, but for all the wrong reasons. Maddie exhaled, not out of satisfaction, but out of finality. Then it's over. It's over, Elliot confirmed. And now you get to decide what comes next. For the first time in a long time, Maddie let herself imagine a future not shaped by fear or survival, but by choice. I want something different now, she said quietly. Something calmer. Something real. Elliot leaned forward, voice softer than she'd ever heard. Then let me ask you something. Real. Her heart paused. He reached into his coat pocket, not for a ring, not yet, but for a small velvet box. He didn't open it. Not a proposal, he said with a faint smile. Not yet. Just a promise. I'd like to build something with you, at your pace. Warmth bloomed deep inside her, steady and sure. For once, Maddie didn't doubt herself. She didn't look back. I'd like that, she said softly. And in that quiet Starbucks corner, amid the hum of morning traffic, something healed that had been broken for years. Not loudly, not dramatically, but beautifully. Spring arrived in Manhattan with soft sunlight and the promise of new beginnings. Lumine & Co. stood taller than ever, booked months in advance, praised in major publications, and finally recognized for the brilliance Maddie had poured into it. But today wasn't about the restaurant. Today was about her future. Maddie stood on the rooftop garden of Elliot's newly renovated penthouse, overlooking a skyline that once intimidated her, but now felt like home. String lights glowed overhead, casting warm reflections across the terrace.
The air smelled faintly of jasmine, and the city's quiet hum rose from below like a blessing.
Elliot approached from behind, footsteps soft, presence steady. You ready? He asked. Maddie smiled. More than I expected. He led her toward a small gathering, just a few close friends, the staff who had become like family, and the people who had witnessed her rise. No cameras, no spectacle, no performance, just truth. Brandon and Tessa were nowhere near this world now, lost in their own chaos, swallowed by the very image they'd tried to build. Their downfall had been public and merciless, but Maddie took no pleasure in it. Their destruction hadn't healed her. Her healing came long before that, when she chose herself. Elliot stopped near a glass railing where the sunset painted the sky in oranges and golds. He turned to her, holding her hands gently.
Maddie, he began softly, you rebuilt your life from the ground up, not for revenge, not to prove anything, but because you deserved more than the world gave you. Her chest tightened, not with pain but with overwhelming gratitude. You taught me what strength looks like, he continued. Not loud, not sharp, but steady, quiet, certain. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the velvet box, the same one he'd shown her weeks before in Starbucks, but unopened until now. This isn't about saving you or fixing you, he said. You already did that yourself. This is about choosing a future with someone who sees you clearly. He opened the box. A simple, elegant ring shimmered in the fading light. Madeline Cruz, he said. Will you marry me? Tears filled her eyes, soft, full, certain. Yes, she whispered. 1,000 times yes. The rooftop erupted in gentle applause. Elliot pulled her into his arms as the city glowed behind them. And for the first time in her life, Maddie wasn't surviving, or proving, or enduring. She was simply, finally, happy. So, that's how our story ends tonight. And if you're still here, still listening, still breathing with this journey until the very last moment, then something in Maddie's story touched a part of your heart you maybe don't talk about often. Maybe a part that's still healing. Maybe a part that just needed to be seen. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action
advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. And that's exactly what we witnessed. Every wound Maddie carried became a doorway. Every humiliation became strength. Every ending became a beginning. She didn't win because life was fair. She won because she chose not to surrender her dignity.
And maybe that's your message tonight, too. You are allowed to start again. You are allowed to outgrow who hurt you. You are allowed to rebuild quietly until the day you no longer need to explain your worth to anyone. If this story found you at the right moment, then stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe, not for numbers, but so we can keep walking through these stories together, healing, learning, rising. I'm still here with you, and I'm proud of you. This video is a work of fictional storytelling created solely for entertainment, reflection, and emotional connection. The characters, events, and situations are not based on real individuals and are crafted to illustrate universal themes of healing, self-worth, and personal growth. Any resemblance to actual people or events is purely coincidental. Our goal is to share meaningful narratives that encourage viewers to reflect on their own lives with compassion and strength. Stories like this help us explore human emotions safely, offering a space to breathe, learn, and imagine better futures. Thank you, YouTube, for supporting creative expression and for helping viewers find content that resonates with them in healthy, authentic ways. And thank you, dear viewer, for being here and experiencing this journey with us.